So Volta's been doing a ton of work throughout the country, really.
Yeah, thank you, Marjorie, for answering all those questions. I feel like I'm a parrot in my office having to explain a lot of those regulations and how they apply to sites. It's really important to consider a lot of the design requirements when we're siting projects. So I'm going to talk through sort of how charging providers look at these requirements and just give a little bit of perspective into how some of the complications and things that we deal with, not necessarily as a way to try and, dodge the requirements, but just to understand how we look at a project and how we take these requirements into account given the constraints that sometimes site deployment demands. As an overview, Volta is, we've done a lot of projects in the state of California. We typically do lower volume deployments, so think 2 to 4 charging stations a piece, which means that we touch a lot of individual properties and we design a lot of these accessible elements into each one of them. So we have experience with over 140 municipalities across the US. We've been working with these regulations, obviously, since the day they were first put into place. But since Volta as a company, due to our business model of providing free charging to drivers and to sites, we pay all of the development costs. So all of the budget implications are our own. So we're extremely sensitive to making sure that we deploy things in a conscientious and cost-effective manner. So just a little bit about charging provider perspectives for those of you. I know there's a lot of providers in the room. Everybody kind of has their own business model, but our approach is that, obviously we're a separate entity from this property owner and operator. We are a charging provider. We do not own the property. We do not own the building or the facility. All we do is we come in, we provide charging stations to businesses that are interested. We actually lease our vehicle spaces. So we operate and pay for the area that we deploy our equipment in. So we're in fact a tenant on the site, as in this image, so is Whole Foods, which gives us sort of a limited ability to affect the site as not an owner. Most of our projects, we provide level 2 charging for the majority of our business. Most of them are retrofits. So we're dealing with what's currently there. You've all saw that beautiful picture. If you're an engineer, it's beautiful. In the permitting guidebook of like the empty parking lot with like dozens of conduits crisscrossing everywhere. We don't have that. So we don't have the ability to completely carve up a parking lot and put it together exactly as the code demands all the time. We have to work with what's there, which means that our projects need to have low impacts to a site. So Whole Foods is not going to be happy if we tear up their parking lot for 8 weeks as we get everything prim and proper. We have to get in and get out and work with a lot of the existing infrastructure. Our typical installation is 2 to 4 EV charging stations at a site. We don't necessarily do the large deployment of superchargers in the back. We're usually right up front. So we're trying to provide charging for as low of a cost with low impact to the operators of a facility. But this was mentioned earlier. I love this conversation. The new development work is steadily increasing as a lot of our partners, REITs and business owners are interested in charging at a planning perspective. So that's really nice to see as somebody in the operations space, as somebody asking, can I make sure that there's a little bit of extra flat space for your accessible EV charging stall? So that's on the rise. So our approach, when we're looking at retrofitting existing sites for compliance, again, Marjorie pointed to all of these, so I'm going to skim through some of them, but we're looking for things that are low impact and easy for us to do to an existing site. So we link to existing accessible elements whenever possible. So there's typically already reserved parking on the majority of our sites, given that they're all commercial. So we try and co-locate our stations with the existing accessible elements, tie into those flat spaces with an access route to the facility. And we can widen perpendicular vehicle spaces. That's very easy. That just takes a little bit of paint. We don't have to do anything special. So those are the things that we love to do. We can provide accessibility for little to no cost when we have those in place. And then there are, of course, scope limitations in section 2 of chapter 11. So we try and make sure that we are understanding what things are outside of our scope when we site, either from a technical and feasibility aspect or from a cost aspect. So things that we can do that are expensive, like I mentioned earlier, the budget for our projects is our own. We pay for it in its entirety. So if we have to do any regrading of parking spaces, oftentimes when sites are planned, the ADA spaces are the flat area. Everything else is usually sloped for some kind of drainage. So it may be over the 2%. That's something that we have to do. Our site engineers literally have levels in their trunks, and they go and they measure the grade of the parking space. We really hope that it's flat enough for us to use without any expensive regrading, but we have done it in plenty of cases when possible. Angled parking stalls due to the dimensions of van accessible spaces are a challenge, and I have an example later, but an angled parking lot would be very sensitive to how that works. And then of course, any hardscape work, anytime we're adding or destroying concrete to a site, it's more impact, it's more cost. These are things that we can do, but if we can design a site in a smart way that avoids that, those are great ways to avoid cost. And then the last portion are the out of scope or infeasible things for us to do as a charging provider and not a building owner. Major parking surface regrading, if we have to regrade more than just the spaces that we're using, it's almost never in a budget that's friendly to a business that's trying to make money. And it's also typically outside the scope of the area that we're allowed to affect as a charging provider. If we owned the facility, we could probably regrade and get all the tenants to agree. But as an EV charging provider, that's something that's not in our scope. And then building and path to travel improvements, we can't raise the height of a parking garage deck. So if it's 7 feet tall, that's the way it's got to stay. It'd be nice to be able to do things like that magically. And I know some of these things we look at a lot of drawings and say, oh yeah, well, can't you just move this line over a little bit? Those things are obviously outside of our control. So this is an example of a tenant site. We do a lot of work with grocery providers. When we look at an overall site, tenants have generally a small footprint. So I've grayed out the area. In this case, this is an actual site, by the way. So Albertsons is one of our major partners. The tenants have a small footprint. So if we look at the available area for us to install Albertsons wants charging stations, we can cross out the majority of this snapshot. This is the area that Albertsons has to work with. Next, if you look at the existing accessible reserved parking, that usually takes up a lot of the prime spots up front to provide the greatest level of access. And we don't touch those things. Obviously, they're there for a reason. So we're left with what's left over, and it's that spot. So when we've talked about all of these codes and regulations and things and design elements, when we apply it to a site like this, that's the area that we have to work with. So if this space is not level, there's not really a lot of other options for us. So we can't move the stations over to the left or the right or the other side of the building because we're leasing these spaces and working with a specific client. This is where they have to go. Otherwise, this project doesn't exist. So, and then another thing that from a private enterprise standpoint, building operators, REITs, commercial property owners and developers, every parking space is tied to a dollar amount. So they're highly sensitive to any levels of parking count reduction, things like that. There's actual dollar amounts tied to all of these parking spaces. So the more that we affect, the more money that is consumed in a project. Here's the same zoomed in area. This is angled parking in addition. So designing this is going to be challenging if you're going to try and incorporate a van accessible space. Like I mentioned earlier, we're typically doing 2 to 4 chargers at a site that has none. So we almost always add the van accessible space unless somebody else has done it for us nicely beforehand, but it's almost always us. So if we look at the actual design for this, this is what the actual CAD layout would look like. This van accessible charging stall, due to the angled parking space, consumes 3 spaces total. Again, this is nobody's fault. This is just the way it works. This site was designed a long time ago before the existing EV regulations were put into place. So this is just what has to work. So we lose a space on the other side. The 18-foot length eats into the other side of the parking row, which basically turns the stall where that, I think it's that if there's a mouse, this vehicle no longer has space to back in, so we just have to stripe it over. And then of course the van accessible stall takes up 2 stalls worth of width. So we've done plenty of these designs. This is an actual layout that we use. So when these things happen, we have to do our best to explain this to the site host and say, hey, look, I'm sorry, but this is the way the code is written. Typically they understand that because they deal with these things all the time. But then we also have to go and work with the jurisdiction on the exact size and shape of how this is deployed. And then when you add on other complications like landscaping, if there's any kind of fire equipment, again, from that overall site layout, this is literally the only area that can be used. So those also tie into the challenges with the accessibility. So we've kind of talked about this all day. Our key areas are for collaboration or the communication early and often about the scope of a project, and then working with AHJs to provide a common understanding. I asked that question about what the definition of a site is because I've heard it explained 4 different ways. We've approached projects where we consider accessible EV charging on one area of a mall to be providing the compliance with the table and 228, and a jurisdiction says, no, we'd actually like you to do some more. And then we have to sort of repeat the process of trying to cite another suitable area for charging or accessible charging. So I'll keep mine short so we can have our break unless there's any questions.
That's super helpful. I think maybe just getting back to that question that came from over there, when designing new sites, it sounds like diagonal parking is not the way to go.
No, it's not. Accessible diagonal parking stalls, especially when you're looking at the van size, the 12-foot wide or 5-foot access aisle, you get into the high 20s for stall depth because the actual, if you go back, the actual depth is not measured from on a diagonal. It's measured as if it was a 90-degree stall, and then you just rotated it. So the higher angle of the diagonal parking, the longer the stall needs to be. So if this is anything over 15 or 30 degrees, your stall needs to be 26 to 28 feet long to provide the 18-foot length all the way across. So it's very challenging. And then the grading is most important. That's the hardest to do after the fact. We have a project that we're currently in design review with a municipality that's asking us to regrade, and the cost of the regrading is double the cost of deploying the infrastructure itself for EV. So if it can be planned ahead of time into a site's design, that's absolutely the way to do it. Robin kind of mentioned the challenges of existing infrastructure, and if you're not doing something from the ground up, it can be very difficult to find spaces that work for accessibility, but we do our best.
Great. Well, thank you. That's very helpful and constructive, Andrew. So maybe let's take a quick 5-minute break and then come back. We'll talk about utilities, which is also a tremendously important part of the process, and get everybody to the ride and drive on time. Sounds good. So come back here in 5 minutes. Round them up. All right. Looks like we're in pretty good. Ed in the back. Oh yeah, thank you. So we'll start with SCE. Perfect. All right. If you guys can grab your seats, we'll make sure we keep on time to get to the clarity in Model 3. Thank you all for sticking with us. So the often forgotten, I think, piece of this puzzle, not forgotten, but overlooked sometimes. We talk a lot about permitting in the course of streamlining, but the interconnection process is equally important in terms of timelines. And so there's a lot that you can do as I think as a city and as a station developer, working with the utility to make sure that that process is as fast as possible. So maybe we'll hand it over here to Simon with Southern California Edison, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks. Yeah, it's oft forgotten, but please don't. Please call us right away when you decide you're going to do something that's EV related, so that we can be your partner in it rather than feel like it's an adversarial relationship. So again, thank you. I am Simon Horton. I'm a senior project manager in our transportation electrification department. Just want to give you a little background on what SCE's vision in this space is. SCE put together a white paper a couple of years ago with our pathway to 2030. We actually updated it recently to our pathway to 2045 of how we intend to support the state's goals and also go a little bit beyond that in GHG reduction and what we can do to get those down below that 80% below the 1990 levels. If I can get this to move forward. There we go. So we kind of see it's a multifaceted strategy. We've got to do some more building electrification, electrify transportation, and decarbonize the grid. So I'm going to move kind of quickly through this so we can get to the core of it, but really we're going to narrow this down to the electrify the transportation. We've got the light duty, medium duty, and the heavy duty sector that we need to get electrified. There's a lot of numbers on this slide. It boils down to this little thing right here. 3 out of every 4 vehicles needs to be, every passenger car needs to be electrified. 2 out of every 3 medium duty truck needs to be electrified. 1 out of every 3 heavy duty. And 1/3 of the energy on the grid is going to be used to power all these vehicles. So SCE's role, we feel it's availability, affordability, and awareness. We're trying to make sure that there's the infrastructure necessary to fuel the EVs, make sure that people recognize that they are affordable and do our part to make sure that the fueling is affordable, and then also build that awareness in the market. So market education, outreach, and making sure that particularly fleet customers understand and understand our support services that we can offer. We do have a full range suite of EV infrastructure programs. Most of those are under the umbrella of Charge Ready. Some of you have heard of various Charge Ready programs. There are some people in the room that actually participated in a couple of our programs. At a high level, SCE designs, builds, owns, and maintains all the infrastructure up to a make-ready stub, and then the customer just provides the charger and obviously the vehicles to plug into the charger. Just a little background on the progress that we've made so far. Our original Charge Ready pilot, we installed 1,230 charging ports throughout our service territory, and we are right now in the process of working on an extension of that where we're going to get that number up closer to 2,600. We did 14 DC fast charging projects just recently completed. We also completed a transit bus project at 3 different transit operators in our service territory, and a large project at the Port of Long Beach to electrify overhead cranes and electrify the yard haulers that haul the containers around the port. Right now, we just recently launched and we are in full swing now with our Charge Ready Transport. Maybe of interest to some of the municipalities that have fleet vehicles of your own. This is a program again where Edison will provide, design, own, maintain all of the infrastructure for your chargers. And in some vehicle classes, we actually provide a rebate against the cost of the charging equipment itself. We are targeting 870 sites throughout our service territory. The goal is to electrify approximately 8,500 medium and heavy duty vehicles. One of the big sectors that's been very active in this initially is school buses and transit buses. And we do also have a couple of residential programs. We just completed our Charge Ready home installation rebate there on the right, and on the left, the Clean Fuel Reward Program, where SCE will provide up to $1,000 rebate per vehicle purchased, including used EV sales. That's an important part there, is that reward covers also used purchases. And then we are launching later this year, based on Assembly Bill 1082 and Assembly Bill 1083, our Charge Ready Schools and our Charge Ready State Parks and Beaches programs, where we'll be doing level 1, level 2 charging in K through 12 schools, and also in California State Parks and Beaches. And the State Parks and Beaches also includes a DC fast charge component. Back up there. Just some examples here if I can get, no, it's not wanting to back up for me here. There we go. Charge Ready 2 is our larger ask that we've got right now with the CPUC for approval. We have not yet received our approval, but the proposal on this is to deploy 32,000 level 2 charging ports throughout our service territory. A lot of cities and municipalities will be able to participate in that program. We are going to make a heavy target in workplaces, apartments, destination centers, and fleets. In addition, we'll also have a DC fast charge component to that program. There will be rebates for various segments, and there's also going to be a new construction rebate. So there's been a lot of discussion today about new construction. If the program is approved as we've requested it, it will have a new construction rebate component. Just a couple of photos here, just completed different projects that we've done in the last couple of years. Some of the transit, medium, heavy duty. This is a slide here that I wanted to highlight important information for those that are coming to Edison and saying, I need power. And we're not going to go through one of your infrastructure programs. We just need to come to you and we have a project. This is for our commercial EV customers. So we've got a couple of groups in here, Electrify America, Tesla. These are all groups that utilize this format. Cities that are doing multiple projects within their own jurisdiction may want to use this type of format. And then we also do just have our standard local planning format for people that are just doing a single EV program or EV project. All of that information is available at SCE.com, and the customer can go right in there and click in. Takes you right through the worksheet of what information is needed for your submittal. But here for the commercial EV process, that's a dedicated process where we provide a single point of contact for any customer that is doing multiple sites throughout our service territory, and they want to be able to have a single point of contact and not have to work with multiple people with the utility. And so this design timeline, it basically takes us through an engineering review, new service request, pre-field verification where we verify the facilities in the field, make sure we give you the viable connection point, takes you through the preliminary design process, the final design process, and through your requirements as a customer during construction. It's a very finite process, has very structured SLAs, service level agreements for each step along the way. And we find that this process works very well. A lot of other utilities across the country have actually modeled their commercial EV process on what we've done. And like I said, if you're just doing a single site, then you would simply go to SCE.com and click on the Install New Service button. Takes you right through the process to meet with a local planner who's going to deal with your local individual project. There's a couple of examples of some completed commercial EV projects. You can see a large Tesla deployment, a ChargePoint deployment, and Electrify America deployment there. So, really, I wanted to go quickly through that and open it up if anybody has questions or if they have, comments about any interaction they've had with Edison or anything that we can do to help serve you better. So.
Oh, there's one.
Is the Charge Ready Transport program just for DACs, or is it low-income areas as well?
It's for any commercial fleet within our service territory. So it can be DACs have a different component in terms of the rebate amount against the equipment, but the infrastructure portion works anywhere in our service territory for any type of fleet customer that's operating medium heavy duty vehicles. There's no DAC requirement.
Okay. And is there any projection for when Charge Ready 2 will launch?
No.
Thank you. That's a big question. But the DACs is for those disadvantaged communities is the specific term.
Yeah, and so, it's a great point. In all of our Charge Ready programs, we do have a DAC component. And typically what it means is we provide the infrastructure regardless of where you are in our service territory. The DAC component typically generates an additional rebate to help offset some of the customer's purchase price of the EVSE.
Sorry, no question, but appreciate your support for the EV community and for our program.
All right, thanks, appreciate it.
Well, thanks. So maybe we can go into Stephen, unless there's other questions, then we can, if we have time at the end, we can ask you both questions. So we have Stephen here from LEDWP, which is another very important partner in the SCAG region.
Thank you for that recognition. Thank you. All right. Well, I'm down here, probably one of these.
There's a guy behind the curtain too.
Okay. I'll let somebody else drive.
There you go. It's magic.
There we go. All right. What do we got going on here? Interesting. All right, just leave. I got you. Okay, perfect. I'm glad we didn't have to walk back up those 17 flights. I'd still be down there huffing and puffing. So I know some of you joined late, but yeah, we had a fire drill earlier, and anyway, that was pretty good. That was well run, this building. So anyway, to keep things short, I could actually truncate my presentation by saying that LADWP is committed to being green. We're going to get to the green zone. And also, as you mentioned earlier, Tyson, at the beginning, it's all about communication. And that's how LADWP is helping streamline the process. Open lines of communication. You know, if you have any kind of questions, never let that just percolate. We're always there to answer questions. So yes, my name's Steve Bullum, Power Engineering Manager in our new business engineering design section. And so what I wanted to focus in on was specifically how we intake a project from a developer, and just to give you a rough guideline. And so at LADWP, we define our chargers in three ways. We internally call a level 1, a level 2, or a level 3. And I'll break it in exactly what that means. But essentially, a level 1 requires no improvement or no modification from DWP. Level 2 requires some type of a system upgrade, maybe a transformer increase or some kind of service drop upgrade. And then level 3 is a dedicated major enhancement to our system. The next slide we've got here shows that typically like about 92% of the influx of jobs is a type 1. Customer applies online. This is commercial. A customer applies online and it goes through the building and safety process and essentially has a green light to go. LADWP comes back and defines or explains, yes, we can serve you. Go ahead and go. And then you can see other percentages here, a lot less percentages of systems where we need to upgrade. So again, type 1, as LADWP defines it, is essentially we provide an adequate facilities letter. Yes, the service panel, our transformer has capacity. Go ahead and tap the existing switchboard and you're ready to go. Type 2 requires some type of upgrade, more than likely a transformer on a pole or a pad mount transformer, upgrading some cables. And so then that'll require some engineering involvement to write up a work package for our crews to help support this installation. Type 3 is like a brand new line extension. You're out in a remote area and there's no existing facilities out there. DWP has to design from scratch, extending a pole line, extending underground, setting an on-site transformer, and equipping. You would install a dedicated switchboard, and so this is a major project. Now, if you wanted to start off kind of on a speculative basis, and you wanted to see, hey, does this target store or does this other type of location, can I get service here? Is it going to be a simple type 1? Is it going to be a type 2, a type 3 job? We have something called a feasibility study, where you can come to our engineers and we'll assess our system and give you a summary that, yes, you know, we have adequate facilities, and we can kind of give you some guidance that, you know, to help you decide if this project for you is a go. And we do charge a fee for that because we pull an engineer off an active job. We assign that person to this feasibility study, and then we'll turn around and update for you to make your analysis. Just like any project, we treat all of these EV projects as a dedicated job, and we've got a preliminary phase, we have a design phase, and we have a construction phase. Now, the preliminary phase is when we intake your scoping documents. And we guarantee, to help with the streamlining process, we guarantee that we'll review your documents within 7 days to determine if we have every piece of information we need. If we don't, we extend a courtesy for 2 weeks. Please get us something additional, one-line diagram. An additional 2 weeks could go by and we'll knock on your door again and say, okay, hey, we need this information, or we need to put this on the back burner, your project on the back burner. So that's how we're helping with streamlining. That's a guaranteed turnaround time. Then, of course, we have the design phase and we have the construction phase. I'll go into a little bit more detail right now. So I touched on prelim phase, and with the key component is DWP can't act until we receive your complete submittal package. So it's critical that you review our design checklist that we have established, and that's online, and you provide us the entire scope. And at the end of our 7-day review, we'll either say, yes, now the job is, we're going to design it, or we need additional information. So once we receive a complete submittal package, we'll now be in the design phase. And here is something that DWP is working on to try and, that's a question we always get, is what's the trending timeline? When can I get a design, whether it's for an upgrade or it's a major system design? And we're working feverishly to try and get you all the support and the resources to be able to come up with a clear trending timeline. I know I've met with several of you here in this office here and trying to pinpoint our timelines, and hopefully we're doing a better job for you. Hopefully those lines of communication are open and we kind of have a good symbiosis going on. Then in the construction phase, again, I break this slide down into no upgrade needed, minor upgrade needed, or brand new installation, line extension required. And the construction phase, you know, DWP is, we're going to design a work package for you to construct from. Then there's also going to be some DWP work packages. More than likely, it requires some type of construction off-site where we have to go through the city and get a Bureau of Engineering utility permit. And so again, there's no hard and fast number that I can provide you for a trending timeline on the permit process. That's out of DWP's control. And our construction process is, you know, we're trending 6 to 8 weeks to be able to, once all of your facilities are installed and we receive a quote unquote authorization to construct, as our inspectors review your facilities and issue everything's a go, we're still targeting 6 to 8 weeks to be able to plan and mobilize our crews to install the infrastructure needed. So our online, I'm not going to go into detail on our online application system, but there's 3 steps, and I have links here. And it's basically, you know, commercial property wants to have a charger installation. There's our website location. Step 2, we're digging down more into the website and, you know, honing in. This is a commercial installation. And finally, step 3 is our checklist and what plans are needed and how to populate the information field, so that once we receive this online application, we can log it in, and then the clock starts ticking for that 7-day submittal period. And you'll receive information on who your engineer is and what the next steps are. So in short, that's the DWP process. I blew through that rather quickly, but again, it's we're dedicated to streamlining the process, and we have you know, we have a one-stop phone number for when there's ever any type of a question. We have 1213 Empower that gets to a group of technicians that can answer anything from engineering design to construction, scheduling, to permitting issues. And then ultimately, here's our online EV application email address. Again, our connection center. And ultimately, the last email down there is if for some reason you're having difficulty getting anybody at Water and Power, this email goes to one of 4 managers at Water and Power, and we continually monitor this so that any question you have is going to be answered either immediately or within 24 hours. So in a nutshell, that's the presentation there. And if there's anything specifically about LADWP that you wanted to address, I can answer any questions. Otherwise, it's going to be a ride and drive time. So.
Great.
All right.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. Are there any questions?
I nailed it, 100%.
You did. But yeah, I think the utilities are tremendous partners. And I think one thing, there are challenges that have happened through the past that, just in terms of just getting these projects in, there's a lot of stuff happening in the state of California. It's not just transportation electrification. There's a lot of electrification. And there's a limited amount of staff. And so with one thing that's consistent among all the utilities in our state, if there are problems, they want to hear about it so they can make it better, right? I think that's
right. Absolutely. And two little technical tidbits I'll throw in here is I know we were talking about fuel cell vehicles as well, and I know that's a challenge because when you're trying to add a fuel cell into a gas station site, DWP's goal is to consolidate the electric service. And sometimes the gas stations are 120 or 122.40, but you need 208. So now there's a modification needed. So there is a little bit of challenge with that. And then one other technical issue, I think you mentioned it about the wrapping transformers so that they blend into the surrounding. LADWP right now is not good with that. We can't accept a wrap of a transformer for safety, identification, trouble calls, and things like that. So something to note doing work in LADWP territory. So, all right.
Okay, Simon.
Yeah, I wanted to mention one more thing I forgot to bring up. We've talked a lot today about AB 1236 and the permit streamlining. One of the things that cities can really do to help streamline for the customers and for themselves is, as part of that checklist that you're creating, have on there, has the customer engaged with their utility. We've encountered that a lot of times where customers have gone through the entire permitting process with the city, then come to us, and the power needs for the site actually conflict with what their final permitted plans were, and they have to go back through the permitting process. So it's just one of those checkpoints of, if they're submitting to you for plan check, have you already engaged with the utility?
Thank you, Simon. Perfect. All right. Thank you, Tyson.
Yeah.
All right.
Great. Thank you. So I guess one last question. As far as engagement with the cities, is there any natural checkpoint besides that checklist, where it would be helpful for the city to engage? Like, is it helpful from the utility perspective when a permit is being pulled to get notified? Is that happening in the course of business?
That is one of our checklist items, is that have you pulled a permit? And so then we know you're dedicated to this project, and then we get that your submittal, the permit is on there, and then we go in 7 days, we're analyzing your job. So it's kind of a parallel path. So
yeah, we definitely agree. It should be a parallel path, and we won't energize a site until we get a final permit sign off from a city saying a site's safe to energize. So, but sometimes people get the cart before the horse. And so we're always preaching, reach out to the utility early, let us know. That way we can help you make your design more efficient. We can make sure you're on the correct rate. We can get you on a dedicated EV rate if it makes sense for your project. Do all those things.
And so essentially, just to put a finer point on it, the project applicant is the carrier of that permit and notification to the utility, generally speaking. You don't necessarily need the city to do something like that.
Yes.
Right.
Great.
Okay. Great.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. So we can wrap up. But before we do, I just wanted to thank a bunch of people. So I think Joe and the SCAG team for putting this together and hosting it. What a beautiful facility. I want to thank CSE for doing the ride and drive, and Honda and Tesla for bringing their cars here, and Veloz. Make sure you share that video around, and kicking gas, which is pretty fun to say out loud. And so, and Electric for All website, but thank them for the lunch. And Kylan did a great job on my team organizing this whole thing. People give me the credit because I sit here and talk, but it's Kylan who did it all. And then really the presenters, thank you for all the information. But most of all, thank you all for being here, for either in person or online. And so hopefully working together, we can, essentially effectively turn the state green in terms of streamlining. We should go, our vision is for California. We're leading the market. We have 50% of the zero emission vehicle market in the United States. We should have the best processes to expand it going forward. And so that's the goal and the vision. So thank you, everybody.